for the envelope. And the National Television Award goes to...
And the winner is...
Because the National Television Award goes to Doctor Who.
Doctor Who.
Doctor Who.
So, it's 2008, the show nearly approaches its 5th year in regards to the revival, with the show being at its peak in popularity, as the show brings back Catherine Tate as Donna Noble for David Tennant's final 3rd season as the 10th Doctor, where the format changes again with the relationship of Doctor and companion, as it changes quite significantly to its previous two, as we find that the Doctor merely just wants a friend rather than a lover, creating this instant best friend bond between the two. Tate's return to the show as a regular character definitely would have created some concern for fans who was worried if Catherine would have been able to pull off such a serious role, with her work being very notable in comedy. Though I should say that her casting very much paved the way for comedians joining the show as the revival went on, as we had quite recently Matt Lucas, Bradley Walsh and currently John Bishop. The bond between Ten and Donna we see take a fun approach that we hadn't seen really in Ten's era as we go through these 13 episodes. But before we get to the series itself, let's talk about Voyage of the Damned. This special is definitely the best RTD special and an overall favourite of mine. We find out the TARDIS, after the ending of the previous series, crashing into a spaceship replica of the Titanic that is currently celebrating Christmas around the orbit of Earth, which was a nice add to the festivity. Something that I must add though that is completely irrelevant to the episode, the new composed theme tune that will stay until the entirety of the RTD run. It sounds very good and creates this new sense of hype and tension for these final episodes. I absolutely adore the theme tune we had from 2005. I don't know how to explain it. It's that quicker paced and sort of that inspiration from the Howl theme as well that just makes me adore this theme tune as well. This episode was also quite bold in casting Australian pop star Kylie Minogue as Astrid Peth, which was very good alongside the other side characters who were all quite lovable except for Rick. Whilst were made to be purposely dislikable, he gave some hilarious lines throughout. The Doctor's speech to the characters in an act of giving them reassurance of their survival was such a defining moment for Tennant's Doctor and a highlight of his era. Astrid sacrificing herself by driving Max off into the blaze down below were quite sad. The execution of the story being that the Doctor saves the fallen Titanic from crashing into Earth was great, as the Doctor sweetly releases Astrid's atoms and essence into space, fulfilling her wish at the start of the episode to explore the universe. The Doctor making Mr. Copper realise that he has a debit card that contains £1 million and that he can lead his best life on Earth was such a sweet way to end the story. It's such a shame though that the actor that played Mr. Copper were actually a complete dick. This series opening is very comedic in tone with the reintroduction of Donna Noble. The format of the episode is brilliant, with the first 20 minutes of the stories shows that the Doctor and Donna don't actually meet each other until the final act, but colliding in hilarious ways as they both seemingly investigate and miss each other by mere seconds. It's interesting that we find Donna regrets backing down from her previous offer in The Runaway Bride, and also shows how enthusiastic Donna is about the wonders of space because of her encounter with the Doctor. As Donna now wishes to find the Doctor, it couldn't have come at a better time, as the Doctor is now back to being alone in the TARDIS. I absolutely love that brief scene in the TARDIS where he babbles on in regards to the Adipose capsule to find that no one's there. The slow camera pan out shot showing how empty the console room is after his realisation really does present why the Doctor needs someone by him. The Adipose are quite harmless aliens, although it's just how they are brought into a world being the more brutal factor about them. Miss Foster essentially being exploited to just merely look after the children until the family return for them was quite sad, especially after a chance given by the Doctor to place herself back on the roof is declined, to where the family quite brutally drop her from the ship to where she falls to her fate. The interesting factor about this episode is Miss Foster's mention of the Adipose planet Adiposia as it goes missing, beginning this interesting series arc of planets going missing in the season. The misinterpretation when the Doctor says he wants a mate because of the previous messy relationships he's had with Rose and Martha and how they fell for him was hilarious, especially as Donna misinterprets that as two mates. This single scene, what's been very comedic, I love that it immediately sets ground rules with Doctor and Donna and where the Doctor stands with him, as the two see each other straight before their travels and show that they'll be travelling as friends rather than lovers, which creates some nice sense of fresh air from the previous two companions. Rose's cameo at the end was great foreshadowing to an amazing turn of events later in the season, although I feel like her impact of her grand return would have been more effective if she wasn't so saw name dropped in the first half of the last series. Donna getting the Doctor to fly by Grandad Wilf's hill to show how she's now with him was so heartwarming, mainly because of Wilf's reaction portrayed by Bernard Cribb, which did come quite unintentionally and written in after Howard Atfield's unfortunate passing. From what we could see though in terms of the deleted scenes that was released on the completed Series 4 box set between Donna and her dad, it honestly looked quite such a natural scene in terms of chemistry for the dad and daughter, though unfortunately wasn't executed well enough due to Howard's such poor condition, with RTD respectfully and preferably wanted to go with Cribbin's more enthusiastic emotion. But honestly though, props to Atfield as he truly gave it his all despite his poor health and really did want to try and film this series. This story is one of my favourite historicals, and I love Donna in the second story challenges the Doctor and his morals against fixed time and how you can't change it. This fiery chemistry between the Doctor and Donna could honestly date back to the Aztecs, with Barbara wanting to change the ways of the Aztecs and the Doctor telling her about fixed time. The Soothsayer Sisterhood in the Pyrovale was interesting villains, and I like the aspect of the Soothsayers drinking parts of the erupting volcano which helped them foresee time. Evelina, daughter of Caecilius, played by Peter Capaldi before his role 7 years later as the 12th Doctor, is a new soothsayer, and due to the consuming of the vapours, she was able to identify the Doctor and Donna, who was previously pretending to be brother and sister Spartacus. Lucius, after this confrontation, also sees into the futures of the two, to where he foreshadows again Rose's return and the mysterious thing that's on Donna's back that we don't find out the conclusion of until the 10th episode. Donna forcing the Doctor to at least save someone from the disastrous events of the volcano, to where he then saves Caecilius' family, was so powerful. And this powerful scene doesn't get forgotten about, as the Doctor's act of mercy in this would later impact him and present why he chose the face of Caecilius for his 12th incarnation. Donna and Ten becoming the new house gods in the Caecilius household was a great ending also, just presenting that sense of gratitude that the family have for the two of them. The return of the Ood were great, with them being more developed as characters rather than overshadowed and being used as a device for the main antagonist to speak, like in their last appearance. The Ood being sold amongst the universe as servant slaves were an interesting concept and a brilliant commentary on captivity and slavery. I love that Donna, as the story goes on, becomes so disgusted about the inhumane way that they're being treated, and how when the Doctor lets her listen to their sad cry and plead for help in their song of captivity, it makes her wish to return home, remembering why she said no in the first place. They find that the prevention is down to Mr. Halpin, who is the antagonist to this story and does play the sleazy CEO stereotype. Ood Sigma patiently waiting for his slow transformation into becoming an Ood due to the poison that was given throughout the story by him. Poison he thought was to help his hair loss was great, and the transformation was utterly gruesome, but so good at the same time. The Doctor freeing the blockage, making the Ood sing their song of freedom, was amazing, and a lovely composition by Murray Gold. We see in the ending as the two depart, Donna then decides to stay with him, which was nice, and Ood Sigma calls the duo the Doctor Donna. Sigma also foreshadows to the end of Ten's song, which were quite chilling, especially since either before this series or after David Tennant then came out saying that he's leaving the show. The two-part starts with its brute factor after showing journalist Lucy Gidget being dismissed by child prodigy Luke Rattigan over theories over his sat-navs Atmos populating cars around the world. Susie, after her dismissal, attempts to take this to unit before her car is overrun and driven into the river. The return of Martha was great, as we found what she's been up to since the events of Series 3, and we found that it was the Doctor who appointed her to unit in the first place, and how she finally became a Doctor. I must say that Ten's attitude towards unit throughout the serial is very different to how he was in his third incarnation, and that he very much disapproves of their brute forces and strategies. That does get him nowhere. I love that Donna and Martha hit it off straight away, and how Martha is very independent in this story, although Martha is then cloned by the Sontarans to find out information and isn't found until the second part, which makes sort of a use in this story other than playing the bad guy quite useless. Sontaran General Stahl's entrance was so intimidating, as he slowly weakens the soldiers' strength with their inability to shoot and their call for help, which just restores and shows how ruthless Sontarans are supposed to be. That slowly just diminished after their second appearance in 1975's The Sontaran Experiment. Martha's warning that she gives to Donna about the consequences of travelling with the Doctor because of what happened to her family. This makes Donna want to go visit Wilf and Sylvia. Donna walking through her street, finally processing the things she's seen, was great. The Doctor coming face to face with General Stahl and quickly undermining him was brilliant, especially because of Stahl's revelation that the man who weakened him was the Doctor. Stahl's bitterness over the Sontarans being secluded from having a part in the Time War was quite interesting. Wilf and Sylvia meeting Ten properly was great, especially since Wilf and Ten had actually met before in Voyage of the Damned. The Sontarans activating Atmos, which begins to gas the entire Earth, with Wilf being trapped in the car slowly choking on the poison gas, was a great and effective way to part one. Sylvia smashing open the car window to free Wilf. The two are actually an interesting contrast, being that Wilf is all for Donna travelling with the Doctor and Sylvia being the opposite. The Doctor finally giving Donna a TARDIS key was great, as she then seeks refuge in the TARDIS to save herself from the increasing level of Atmos gas. Luke being desperate and losing his students and then being betrayed by the Sontarans made for a little sympathy for this quite antisocial character who fell victim to the exploitation of just being too clever. The Doctor yelling at Colonel Mace to get the soldiers out before they all get massacred by the invading Sontarans was great, though whilst Pace does, it is too late as the soldiers are massacred nevertheless. The mentions and whereabouts of the Brigadier was nice with him stranded in Peru. There are actually talks of having the Brig a part of the revival, though due to Nicholas Courtney's older age and how he felt it were all too quick paced now, they wasn't able to, though he did appear in the Sarah Jane Adventures. And there are also plans in having the 10th Doctor and the Brigadier meeting in the wedding of Sarah Jane Smith, though unfortunately Nicholas Courtney was too ill to film. The execution being the Doctor clearing the sky that removed the poisonous gas that was actually feeding the Sontarans as they conquered Earth was good, and the Doctor giving Stahl and the Sontarans an ultimatum only for them to refuse, in which Luke takes Ten's place and blows up the entire fleet himself was great, as although this was Luke who pushed the button and saved the day, the Sontaran Carl, who survived the explosion, who appears several months later in opening story of the second season of the Sarah Jane Adventure, he does state that it was the Doctor. The cliffhanger of the story being that Martha is about to head out the TARDIS, only for the TARDIS itself to take off, was an interesting ending, being that the Doctor had no control over this unexpected takeoff. Whilst the episode title is a little over-exaggerated to say that Jenny comes from a machine that took sample of Ten's biological tissue, the story is the weakest from Series 4, but definitely not bad and still a good watch. Jenny, a name given by Donna, played by Georgia Tennant, as a character is alright, and I like how the Doctor throughout the story helps remove that programmed mindset into thinking violence is the only way. Martha's involvement in the story is kind of pointless to say that she spends merely the final act with the Doctor, Donna and Jenny. The Doctor originally being hesitant to call Jenny his daughter was kind of sad, although he does begin to bond with her as the story goes on. This hesitance is explained with the Doctor's appall for violence, and also how he tells Donna that he has had children before that may or may not have died in the Time War, which was honestly quite interesting. Donna discovering that this supposed century-long human half-war actually started 7 days ago was great, and the Doctor declaring that the war being over, smashing open the source, begins a new world was nice, although Colonel Cobb, leader of the human side, doesn't take kindly to this peaceful treaty and goes to shoot the Doctor, only for Jenny to take the fall. Ten snapping to the point where he nearly shoots Cobb before throwing the firearm, saying how he never would kill, was amazing, and I love his powerful speech to the two races on how they should learn of his mercy and take that in their legacy. Martha's second departure was great, but again her presence in this story wasn't exactly needed, though it was nice. The story ending with Jenny surviving and stealing a ship to go travel in space and time was okay, but kind of ruined the emotion that we had before. The story being styled like an ITV4 midsummer murder drama made the story to be quite enjoyable, as the Doctor finally meets Agatha Christie after many name drops in previous stories, as the story plays its own spin on her disappearance. The story going for a murder among us style, with the antagonist being the Vesper form, was great, and I love how it switches back to human form as it hides amongst the other house members. Agatha concluding everyone in the house with their own separate lies to deduct and find the killer, with Donna commentating in the background was brilliant, and the conclusion that the Lady Clemency's lost child is the Reverend, who is the Vesper form, was a great twist. The Doctor concluding that the reasoning behind the Vesper form killing in the same style as Agatha's books was because that when becoming aware of his alien nature, he absorbed the details of an Agatha Christie murder mystery, with his mum reading that at the time. After a brief chase sequence, the Donna throws the necklace in the lake, which kills the Vesper form, leaving nothing but purple water, which visually looked quite cool. The Vesper phone letting Agatha go and sparing her, in which results to her amnesia and making her forget the day she disappears, which links back to her disappearance in real life, was really clever. It's interesting when the Doctor proposes that perhaps Agatha learned bits of their encounter because of her book Death in the Clouds were great, and the ending was so much better, leaving it as a question of if she remembered rather than it being fact, as there was a scene actually cut from the episode with Ten and Donna going to see an older Agatha to read the story of Death in the Clouds. This two-parter is heavily praised amongst the fandom, and again, like with The Empty Child, The Doctor Dances and The Impossible Planet and The Satan's Pit, whilst I don't get its massive praise, it's still a very solid story nevertheless. The setting of the serial being in a library that is in the mind of a young girl called Cal was an interesting setting for the story. The lighting of the story being a very essential factor because of who the Doctor was up against, that being the Vasta Narada, an unknown entity that lurks in the shadows, was great and perfectly done. The introduction of archaeologist River Song is great now, but also quite interesting back then, especially since she's aware of the Doctor as she plays heavily in his future. Evangelista, the youngest of River's archaeology expedition, and her brutal death was quite sad, especially the concept of the data ghost being in the suits of the archaeologists is such a dark concept, especially that being the dead speaking their final thoughts whilst the suit dies out. Throughout the story we see River having a diary on her which entails her entire timeline with the Doctor, and after Donna questions what she's like in the future, River quite chillingly replies with that she doesn't know of her whereabouts, which again was some great foreshadowing of the conclusion of her character. The end to part 1 was quite tense, being the Narada slowly cornering the Doctor, River and her remaining crew, as Donna is then saved by Cal, which results in her face being placed on a flesh bank, a storage drive that keeps the security of every human Cal saves. Part 2 begins with Donna awakening in what seems to be a perfect world, almost everything she's ever asked for, with the perfect husband and kids living in the ideal world, which I found to be so sweet. Although the slow and cruel realisation that all of this isn't what it appears to be is quite sad for Donna. The Doctor rightfully being quite conflicted regarding River and how she says she knows so much about him and his future was interesting, and I love how it took was River to whisper his real name to ensure this level of trust, and how that's all Ten needs to know to believe her. Evangelista warning Donna that her world isn't real, showing a distorted face that had been unsuccessfully downloaded when Cal saved her, was quite horrific. The revelation back at the library that everyone else that was supposedly killed is actually safe and was downloaded by Cal was nice, although the crumbling of Donna's ideal world with the children disappearing was so sad for Donna, showing the tragedy of the character and how she can never have anything happy. Rose sacrificing herself for the headspace because she knows it's the last place in her diary, meaning that this results in a death, and that although it's the first time the Doctor has seen her, this will be the last time for her. The Doctor realising that his future self must have purposely left enough energy in River Sonic to save her and download her into the banks of the library to where she's joined by her expedition crew was sweet. Overall, this was a great introduction to River's story arc, which will come more important when Moffat takes over, and it's also a sweet ending for fans who have watched her chronologically and come back to see a story end. I done a light story that made the episode quite interesting and also showed the vulnerability of being without a companion, and particularly how Ten's arrogance can get him into hot water. Whilst being the budget saving episode, it works for what the story is, creating a claustrophobic environment. The Doctor heading onto an expedition trip through the planet of Midnight with some other passengers made for quite an interesting dynamic for the story, with Ten and the passengers getting along instantly, as we find more about these side characters during the interactions of scenes that take place during the several hours it takes to get them to Midnight, although the bond between each other begins to break when this entity enters on board. The entity taking over Sky was great, and the possessed guy copying everyone was great and quite terrifying, especially when the entity begins to speak at the same time as everyone and essentially drown them out. Although the passengers devise a quite brutal plan to throw her out, the Doctor is wanting to keep the entity alive, much to the passengers' dismay, which causes then the passengers to turn on the Doctor, which was quite good, and now presents the vulnerability of the Doctor being alone, especially since the Doctor attempts to use his arrogance as a reason for his survival, which just angers the passengers. The entity stealing the Doctor's voice, tricking the passengers into thinking it's moved on to him, was really cunning, and as the passengers were ready to throw the Doctor out, it's the stewardess that realises that the entity stole the Doctor's voice. The quite dark execution of the stewardess sacrificing herself to remove Sky and save the Doctor was quite tense and sad, especially since no one actually got a name, which means this selfless sacrifice just gave to be so heartbreaking. Doctor and Donna meet back up and Donna repeats Ten's motto bene, only for him to tell her not to do it again. It was such a subtle scene, as whilst it shows how much the Doctor stresses not to do that again, it also shows how much trauma Ten had had with that adventure and how traumatised it left him. Whilst the last episode was very much Donna-like, this episode is Doctor-like and plays with the idea of a world without the Doctor. The ongoing loose arc with something being on Donna's back is satisfyingly concluded in this story also, which was great. The fortune teller getting the Donna to look into a possible alternate reality where if she had turned her car right, she'll have never gotten the job at H.C. Clements and never met the Doctor, which begins to retcon the events of their first encounter. The episode presents this horrible chain of events as Donna, like the rest of the world, observes this. The chain starting quite chillingly with the death of the Doctor himself and how he drowned in the River Thames due to the events of the runaway bride, and Donna not being there to stop him. The awaited return of Rose Tyler was great, who seems to be quite aware that this reality is an alternate one as she attempts to persuade Donna into helping her, to where she originally refuses. The deaths of Martha, Sarah Jane, Luke, Clyde, Maria, Gwen and Yanto because of their sacrifices due to the Doctor not being there during the events of Smith and Jones and the Sontaran Stratagem and the Poison in the Sky was quite dark, especially since Russell had the balls to kill off the younger cast of the Sarah Jane adventures. Sylvia being quite optimistic with America apparently going to save Britain, only for then 60 million of them to be dissolved or die to deadabos, or the Atmos gas was quite cruel, which just then makes Sylvia lose all hope in the world, and even in Donna, which was quite heartbreaking. This all results in her final meeting with Rose to find out the planets and stars are disappearing, which then all this finally gives Donna her final nudge to help her, which entails travelling back to stop herself from turning right. Maybe due to the deliberate shortage of time and how long it would take to get to her past self, Donna has no other alternative but to kill herself to block traffic and make her past self go left, which was great. We find what was on Donna's back was actually a time beetle, a creature that feeds off different realities and is actually part of the brigade of the Trickster, beings who merely live off the chaos they do to time. The Trickster itself is also a prominent villain in the Sarah Jane adventures. The episode ends with Donna telling the Doctor of Rose's final words to her being Bad Wolf, which was great, and we find that word being linked to the end of the universe. The episode's cold opener presents that the Earth has been moved, with the Era's main cast, Rose, Martha, Sylvia, Wilf, Jack and Sarah Jane looking outside, all to find that the sky is full of planets that have been moved too. The entire cast being credited in the title sequence really puts the whole RTD era into perspective, and I love the inclusion of everyone coming together, including the spin-offs. All the characters hearing the Daleks again was amazing, although Sarah's reaction to it really gives it that nudge of intimidation, especially because it had been so long since she had heard them again. The Doctor and Donna having no other choice but to seek advice from the Shadow Proclamation, an intergalactic force that the Jaduna employed to and make a return, but also what had been name dropped since Series 1. As the two are at the Proclamation, we also find that the stolen planets had been taken out of time as well as space, which was quite interesting, especially as whoever stole these planets were trying to hide themselves from the two. The return of Davros was great, especially due to the brilliant acting by Julian Bleach. We really see Davros at his most psychotic and power-mad in this story. The Daleks naming the humans were a nice nod to their first invasion of Earth in 1964's The Dalek Invasion of Earth, and then brutally killing the family that refused to comply with them as they went back inside by exploding their house was dark. The companions all accepting defeat until Harriet Jones returns and rounds them all up was great, and Torchwood complimenting Sarah on her work to where she then says that she stays away from them because it's too violent was quite funny, presenting the huge contrast between both spin-offs. The companions then all coming together to call the Doctor via Mr. Smith calling the number on every phone and then getting the rift to boost the signal was amazing, as the TARDIS is then sent forward a second at a time, showing that second in time that hiding spot for the Daleks. Harriet being exterminated was quite sad, especially as the character redeemed herself from that quite brutal attack on the cigarettes in the Christmas invasion. The Doctor hearing Davros again after the Time War was great, and we find that Dalek Khan found at the end of last season's Dalek story was teleported back to the Time War, and how he scooped in and saved Davros, although that costed his sanity. The Doctor then coming face to face with Rose again was great, until the Dalek shoots him before they can even do physical contact. Gwen and Yanto's reference to dead members Tosh and Owen and how they went out fighting, referring to the Torchwood Series 2 finale, was quite sad. Zara being stopped in a car by 2 Daleks and a Dalek infiltrating the Torchwood hub was both shocking cliffhangers, as the final one tops cake, with 10 regenerating being an amazing ending. Part 2 begins with Mickey and Jackie returning to kill the 2 Daleks that were going to kill Sarah, and we also find that Gwen and Yanto are kept nice and safe in Tosh's time lock. As the Doctor regenerates, he finishes his regeneration quite abruptly, still in his 10th incarnation, finding that he used the regenerative energy to repair himself and then feed the rest of the energy into that jar of his hand. Whilst I find that being a bit of a cop-out and a waste of a regeneration, the importance of that leftover energy in the hand jar as it calls out to Donna after this, it was quite interesting. When the 410 Donna, Rose and Jack aboard the Dalek Citadel, Donna is locked inside the TARDIS to where the Dalek Supreme that goes to then destroy the TARDIS, regardless of the fact that Donna is inside it. As the TARDIS is slowly being destroyed, Donna then finally answers the calling of the hand, which becomes more prominent as the ship is being destroyed. She then touches the jar to show Donna also gave a feed of her own energy, which exposed the jar and has the hand grow into a clone of the Doctor. Doctor being brutally sat through and having to watch and think in his mind that the TARDIS and Donna are to be destroyed were quite sad, until the Meta-Crisis Doctor swoops in, being able to materialise out before the complete destruction. The Meta-Crisis Doctor being an amalgamation of a human and Time Lord, which was a quite interesting concept, and his realisation that there's been something binding him and Donna together like destiny was interesting. The Daleks brutally killing the prisoners using the alignment of the 27 planets to disintegrate them was chilling. All the companions begin to come together as Martha, Sarah, Jack, Mickey and Jackie threaten to use the Osterhagen key and the warp star against the Daleks at Davros, which was great. I love the small scene of Davros recognising Sarah because of her involvement in his creation of the Daleks on Skaro in 1975's Genesis of the Daleks. Davros putting the Doctor through this mental trauma of making him remember all the losses of characters in the era and all the people that had died in his name. After a brief attempt to stop Davros and the Daleks by Meta-Crisis 10 and Donna, the Doctors and companions bear witness to the reality bomb being detonated to destroy all matter, until Donna quite humorously cancels the detonation of the bomb, which was quite as don't get me wrong, the concept of it was quite interesting, but how easy it was to turn off something so bigged up like the reality bomb, and also how convenient it all was to destroy the Daleks and help restore the planets, being in that one room. The execution, like I said last time with Series 3's finale, I feel is quite rushed, with the controls all happening to be there to help execute this story, restore the planets and destroy the Daleks. Although I can let it slide a little as it's Donna who happens to do all this, Donna having little confidence in herself at the start of it and helping to save the universe at the end of it, thanks to absorbing some of the regenerative energy in the hand jar that only tapped into her mind when hitting her head. I love that the Meta-Crisis Doctor has the same angry PTSD mindset as the Ninth Doctor by destroying the entire Dalek fleet, as we also find that Khan was the one to orchestrate this entire thing, wishing to see the death and the end to all Daleks, knowing the truth of their species and decreeing no more. Doctors and the companions flying Earth back home using the Torchwood Rift and Mr. Smith was amazing, and truly a great celebration to the RTD era, as we then get scenes of the Doctor briefly saying goodbye to Martha, Jack, Mickey and Sarah Jane, which all were sweet goodbyes, especially since it was arguably the last hurrah between them all together. The Doctor leaving Rose's Meta-Crisis self, that as the life cycle of a normal human so she can make him better like she did with the Ninth Doctor, was quite beautiful, especially when we finally have confirmed that the Doctor's final words to Rose in the ending of Doomsday was going to be "I love you." The tragic ending being that Donna's mind is slowly burning up due to the incapability of being able to handle the mind of a Time Lord results in the Doctor having no other option but to wipe everything they ever did together, which was quite heartbreaking. Doctor returning Donna home to Wilf and Sylvia and telling them how there's worlds that are forever in a debt for saving them was just so unfortunate, as Donna forever put herself down throughout the series and insulted her significance, and yet this strong significance here with the entire universe being saved, she'll never be able to remember. And I love Thames' brief diss to Sylvia into having more faith in her daughter. The Doctor saying his final goodbye to Donna as she's completely oblivious to who he is was heartbreaking, as Donna can reverts back to how she was in The Runaway Bride, which was brilliantly purposely done here by RTD. The Doctor has now reverted back to being alone in the TARDIS, with Dream of a Normal Death playing during this, which made it again so heartbreaking. And I'm so happy that he skipped the cheesy Christmas cliffhanger here. That was originally planned to have the Cybermen briefly appear behind the Doctor, and that they just let the emotion ride and what just transpired set in. So with all 14 episodes reviewed, where they go in terms of rank? I'm going to go through these quite swiftly. So number 11, The Doctor's Daughter. Number 10, Planet of the Ood. Number 9, The Sontaran Stratagem and the Poison Sky. Number 8, Silence in the Library and the Forest of the Dead. Number 7, Voyage of the Damned. Number 6, Partners in Crime. Number 5, The Fires of Pompeii. Number 4, The Unicorn and the Wasp. Number 3, Turn Left. Number 2, Midnight. And number 1, The Stolen Earth and Journey's End. In conclusion, Series 4 is a fun bow out for the 10th Doctor, who has merely 4 stories to go before Tennant leaves. Russell T Davies and Catherine Tate really did wonders in transforming Donna from this one-off shouting fishwife to a brilliant character, as Tate really gave it her all, showing off many other genres that aren't just comedy. Series 4 also felt the beginning of the end for the 10th Doctor, but also Russell's time as showrunner, as these 4 specials slowly present the 10th Doctor in territory we have never seen before.
Instantaneous biological meta crisis.
Michael, Aldi. Still could be worse.
Oi, watch it, Spaceman.
Boy, watch it, Earth Girl.
I'm interrupting you.
I was gonna be with you. Forever.
I know.
That must be her! Donna!
Help me.
Donna?
That there are people living in the light and singing songs of Donna Noble. 1,000 million